Hello, this is your video demonstration lecture for if functions and GoalSeek. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the absolute cell referencing because you often see an absolute cell reference when you are working with if functions. So I've set up a worksheet here for modern music shops. I have at the top assumptions table. These are our what if assumptions. It's pretty common in a worksheet like this to include what-if assumptions for the purpose of easily changing it later. I can put these assumptions in here, and then if I decide, no, actually I'm going to increase my commissions, all I have to do is change the number in the commission assumptions, and it'll automatically change everything in the worksheet below. So it's a quick way to determine if a new number will make a difference. So the first thing I need to do is calculate my cost of goods sold. So my cost of goods sold is going to be my sales minus 1 from my margin. My margin is the amount of profit that I want to make. So the cost of goods sold is 100% minus the margin because 100% is the full amount. So I'm going to create a formula here to calculate that. So remember, all of our formulas always start with an equal sign. So I do the equal sign. And you can either type in the cell reference or you can click on the cell. I prefer to click, which is called the point and click method, because then I know I'm accurately getting the information. If I type in a cell reference, I might type the incorrect number. In a large worksheet, and when I know the cell references, I'll type them in rather than scrolling up and down to try and find the reference before I click it. My revenue is my sales, and I'm going to multiply this by 1 minus my margin. Now when I copy this formula from column B over to column C, D, E, F, etc., I don't want this reference of B4 to change because there's nothing in C4, D4, E4. So in order to make this not change, I need to make it an absolute reference, meaning that no matter where I copy this formula, B4 will always stay as B4. So to make an absolute reference, I hit the F4 key, and you can see that puts a $sign in front of the B and a $sign in front of the 4, meaning both the column and the row will stay the same no matter where I copy the formula. B13 is a relative reference. It does not have the $sign in front of it. So when I copy this formula, the reference of B13 will move. So when I copy this formula to column C, B13 will change to C13, but B4 will stay the same as B4 no matter where it goes. So I'll go ahead and hit the enter key to get that formula in there. Now I want to calculate my gross margin. My gross margin is my revenue minus my cost of goods sold. Now I'm going to use the fill handle to fill these two formulas all the way across all my months and into the total column. So I can select these at once, grab the fill handle in the corner, and drag it across. Now you can see when I go to column F, what formerly was B13 is now F13. What was B4 is still B4 because I used an absolute reference there. Now I'm going to work on my expenses. The first expense I have is for my bonuses. So now I'm going to calculate my bonus. My bonus is determined based upon my sales revenue. If my sales revenue is greater than or equal than the number I've set up in my what-if assumptions table, sales revenue for bonus, then a bonus of $200,000 will be paid. So I'm going to use an if function to determine this. Remember that there are 3 parts to the if function. The first is the logical test. Is my revenue greater than or equal to the revenue that's needed for a bonus? The second part of my if function is the true statement. If it's true, then the bonus is $200,000. If it's false, the bonus is 0. I'm going to create this if function 2 different ways. The first time, I'm going to type in the cell references. The second time, I'll use the function argument box. So just like any other formula, I'm going to start this with an equal sign and then the word if. And now you can see this pop-up screen tip tells me I need my logical test. What is my logical test? My logical test is asking if the revenue is greater than or equal to the sales revenue for bonus. Now again, I need to use an absolute formula here because I'm going to copy what the formula in B18 is all the way across to all the months. And if I don't use an absolute reference, it's going to then look at C7 and D7, and there's nothing there. I could copy these numbers in my assumptions table all the way across, but that would kind of clutter up my worksheet. So rather than doing that, I'll just hit the F4 key to make that an absolute cell reference. Now I'm going to leave B13 as a relative reference because I won't be using that one across all of them. I want it to change. So when it gets to column C, it's going to look at the sales for August. Now I'm going to use a comma because I finished off my first part of my function. And now you can see what's highlighted is value if true. So what happens if this is true? Well, if this is true, we want $200,000 to appear in that cell that contains the formula. Again, this needs to be an absolute reference because there's nothing in C2, D2, etc. If it's false, I want it to show 0. Now I'll close my parentheses and hit enter. And you can see this is 3.1 million, which is less than 3.5 million, therefore there's no bonus. But when I use the fill handle to copy this to all my months, I do have bonuses. This month the sales are nearly 8 million, so I have a $200,000 bonus. Now this can also be changed. If I decide that I want to pay $150,000, all I do is change this in my assumptions table and it automatically updates down here. I can also change my revenue for bonuses. Maybe they need to have revenue of 6 million. Now you can see this month went away because their sales were only 5 million. So that's how you can use an assumptions table and an if statement. It's a dynamic formula. It'll change whenever you change data in your table. The next formula I want to create is for my commission. Now my commission and all my other formulas are going to be based upon the percentage that's listed above times my revenue. So again, we're going to use absolute formulas for these. So commission, I'm going to start with an equal sign. It'll be revenue times my commission percentage. And I need to make the commission percentage an absolute formula. Marketing, same thing. It's going to be revenue times my marketing percentage. And this is absolute. If you forget to put in the absolute parts, you'll see it when you copy the formula across. So for example here, I won't put it in and we'll see what happens. Now this doesn't have the absolute, and when I copy it, I get 0 because there's nothing in the next cell. So I can go back and change this. You can edit a formula by hitting the F2 key. Move into the middle, F4, adds the dollar signs, and enter. And my last one here is for support. Okay. Now I had mentioned that I want to show you the other way to enter an if statement, and that's using the function's argument. So I'm going to go ahead and delete these. And this time I'm going to hit the FX key up here in the address bar. And it shows you the most recently used functions. And if you haven't used a lot of functions, if will probably still be here listed as your most recently used function because it's one of the most common functions. So with the if statement selected, I'll go ahead and click OK. And it gives me boxes for each of the 3 parts, for the logical test, the value if true, and the value if false. I'm going to move this out of the way by grabbing onto the title bar, moving it to the side. So what is my logical test? My logical test is if revenue is greater than or equal to sales revenue. And you can see right now it's checking that first one, and it's saying no, that's false. But again, just because I'm in the functions argument box doesn't mean I don't have to use absolute references. Excel does not know when to use an absolute reference unless you tell it. So I'm going to use the F4 key here. Now my value, if true, is my 200,000. And again, I'll use F4. My value of false is 0. Now I could type the actual number 200,000 in here, but then if I wanted to change the bonus amount, I would have to go into each individual cell and type it, or I'd have to type it in the first one and then fill it across. It's much easier to reference a cell in an assumptions table. So when I enter the 3 values here into my arguments box, it says, okay, this first one is false. If it were true, the answer would be $200,000. If it were false, the answer would be 0. This one is in fact false, so we use 0. And it shows the formula results down here. So I'll go ahead and click OK. And now I have that in as well. There's no difference whether you enter a formula in the functions box or if you enter it in the cell. It's not going to change anything. The outcome is the same. Now I need to add up all of my total expenses. So I'm going to click on cell B23 where my total expense number is and click the auto sum button. It's asking me to verify this range and hit enter. Now my operating income is going to be my gross margin minus my total expenses. None of those need to be absolute references. They're all relative because we want them to change as they move across the cells. So I'm going to select all of those at once, use the fill handle to drag it across. And now I have all my numbers in. I don't want to use the fill handle all the way across to the total because the total is the total of the rows, not information from the columns. But I can grab that by clicking on the range where I want my new totals to appear and click auto sum. And it'll put those in. So I hope that this has helped you understand the if function a little bit. And now we will go on to look at some more examples of the if function. Okay, the next thing I wanted to do is show you a few more examples of using the if function. These will look familiar because they're what I discussed when I did the PowerPoint presentation, but I actually want to go through this and talk about using the if function and seeing how it works in Excel. So I have my first worksheet here, and this function I'm going to use is going to use the if function with text. So I want my true and false action to be text rather than a formula or a number or a cell reference or something else. So I'm going to click in the first cell where I want my function to appear. And again, I'll do this one twice so you see how you can do it using cell references by pointing and clicking and typing, and then also using the argument box. So my logical test, I'm going to start my if function. My logical test is going to be if the number of people attending is anything other than 0, so if there's 1, 2, 3, 10 people attending, then that passes my logical test. So my logical test is going to be if whatever's in B4 is greater than 0, so any positive number. If that's true, I want the word yes to appear in this cell. And again, I need to put quotation marks around the word yes. If that's false, I want no to appear in the cell. And I just type that in using the keyboard, my yes and my no, close my parenthesis, and hit enter. And you can see that yes pops up. If I change this to 0, it changes to no. You don't have to use yes and no, true, false. You can use anything you want in here. You can use not attending, and then attending. And that will show up in the text. Now I want to do this again. This time I want to use the function's argument box. So I'm going to click the FX, and I want to use an if statement. My logical test is going to be if B5 is greater than 0. I don't want to do greater than or equal to 0 because equal to 0 is a non-response, is not attending. If it's true, then I want the word yes to appear. If it's false, I want the word no. Now you notice I'm not actually typing the quotes. When I'm using the function argument box, Excel knows that I've typed text in there, and Excel will add the quotes for me. So now I have my logical test, my true, and my false, and I'll click OK. And the word no appears. Okay, so that's the first example of using text. Very simple example, but regardless of how you do the text, it's going to be the same arguments. The logical test, a true and a false. Here I have example number 2. This one is going to use a formula, and I don't have an assumptions table in this. I could have one, but I don't, so I'm going to actually type the numbers into the argument. Again, I'll do this one twice. So in this situation, I have employees and they've earned sales for the month. If their sales are $1,000 or more, they get a 5% bonus. So they get an additional 5% on top of their sales. So I'm going to start my function. If the sales are greater than or equal to, because I said it could be equal to $1,000, then they get 5% times their sales. Otherwise, they get 0. So you can read the function. If B4 is greater than or equal to 1,000, then 5% times B4, otherwise 0. So in this case, the sales are over 1,000, so the employee is going to get a $75 bonus. If the sales were 2,500, that bonus jumps to 125, which is 5% of the sales amount. Now I'll do this again, this time using the function argument box. So I'm using an if statement. So my logical test is if the sales are greater than or equal to 1,000, and then my true test are sales times 5%, otherwise 0. And this time it's 0 because their sales are not $1,000. If they were to get them up to 1,000, they would get a $50 bonus. So again, I can add an assumptions table above or below this, where I could put my sales needed for bonus, and I type the $1,000. I could type my percentage of bonus, which would be 5%, and then I would reference the cells in the formula rather than referencing these numbers, 1,000 and 5%. Example number 3. This one is going to add the contents of the if function to a cell. So in this situation, we have customers who have ordered product and they are having it shipped to them. If the shipping is over $100, the shipping cost is only $5. If the shipping is $100 or less, then they have to pay $10 for shipping. So regardless of the outcome, the yes or the no, the true or the false, something will be added to the cell. So I want to include that cell outside of the function argument so that I don't have to type it twice. So I'm going to use the equal sign first because you always do that for a formula regardless of how you're entering the formula. And I'm going to type B4 because regardless of how much they are ordering, doesn't matter if it's true or false, they're still going to have something added to the sales. So B4 plus whatever's in the if statement. So I have if B4, which is my sales, are greater than $100, then $5 is added. Otherwise, 10. So if my sales are greater than $100, you're going to add $5 to cell B4. If it's false, you're going to add $10 to cell B4. I could do the same thing by putting B4 plus 5 and then B4 plus 10, but that's an extra step. So to save myself a little time, I just put the B4 outside of the argument and enter. So you can see in this case the sales were greater than $100, So now my shipping becomes, this should be total cost, becomes my shipping of $5 plus my sales. When I use the fill handle to copy this formula down, this one, my shipping is going to be $10 because my sales are less than $100. Okay, in my fourth example, I'm looking at a nested if function. With an if function, you only have two choices, true and false. In a standard if function, there are only two options. There are times that you might need a third, a fourth, or a fifth option, and in that case, you would have a nested if function, which is one if function inside of another. So in this example here, I have employees who have sales and commission rates. If their sales are less than $500, they get 2% commission on their sales. If their sales are over $1,000, they get a 5% commission. If it's anything in between, so 500, 600, 700 to 1,000, then the commission is 3%. So I have more than just my true false. I have more than just two statements in my if function, so I'm going to need to use a nested if function. And again, like our previous example, in this case, this commission percentage is going to be multiplied by the sales in every situation, whether it's true, false, or otherwise. You're always going to multiply it. So I'm going to put my multiplier outside of my if statement. So I'm going to start in the first one here. So B4 is my multiplier. Oops, forgot my equal sign. So regardless of what happens in my if statement, it's always going to be multiplied times B4. And then I do if. So I'll do my first logical test. So if the sales, which are in B4, are less than $500, then the commission is going to multiply by is an F5. Now I only have the rates listed once, so I need to make this part, whenever I reference a rate, an absolute value. Now I'm going to insert my second if statement. So I have if again, the sales are greater than $1,000, then I'm going to multiply it by my highest percentage. And again, that's going to become an absolute value. Otherwise, so this is my false, I'm going to multiply it by my otherwise value, and again, make that absolute. So we'll take a minute to look through this. So regardless of what happens in my if statement, it's always going to be B4, which is my sales, multiplied by something. We just don't know what we're going to multiply it by yet. If the sales in B4, and we'll fill this down so it'll change to see B5, B6, etc. If they are less than $500, then we're going to use our rate of 2%, which is referenced in the table at F5. F5 needs to be an absolute number. If it's not, when I copy the cell down to row 5, that F5 will change to F6. And they don't earn 5% for a sale that's less than $500. So that's my first true statement. If the sales are less than $500, we're going to multiply it by 2%. And then I don't have a false yet, so I have to do a second if statement. If the sales are greater than $1,000, then we're going to multiply it by the 5%. Finally, if neither of those two conditions are true, so if anything else is true, we're going to multiply it by 3%. That's our false. Now you're not limited to just 3 arguments in your if statement. Again, I mentioned in the PowerPoint, I use an if statement for calculating grades. So I have an A, B, C, D are all true, and then a grade of an F is my false statement. So I would have 4 if functions in there. So now that my if function is all set, I'll go ahead and hit enter. And it's telling me I have 2 parentheses in here, so I need double parentheses at the end. And Excel will add that for me. and I get 16.44. So we know that $548 is between the 500 and the 1,000. So let's see if it calculated it right. So if I can do a little math here in Excel, 548 times 3%, and I get 1644. So it's correct. Now I'm going to use the fill handle to fill this down. And again, I can kind of test some of these. Let's test our big one. So I have $1,234 times 5%, and I get 6170. So that's correct. So my if statement is working correctly. When it got down here to the sales that were over 1,000, it automatically applied the 5% commission to the sales. And again, you don't have to have commissions in here. You don't have to have cell references. Your if statement could contain words. If the sales are less than 500, maybe your words are hopefully next month's better. If your sales are greater than 1,000, you can have something that says, way to go, great job. And if they're in between, you can say, good job, hard worker, something to that effect. So you can have anything show up as your true value. And you can also, again, have more than 2 arguments in your if statement, whether you're using text, cell references, or formulas. So I hope this has helped you understand the if function a little better. And the next part of this video is going to go back to our worksheet on modern music and talk a little bit about goal seek. We're back at our Modern Music Shops worksheet, and I have filled in all the rest of the data and formatted the worksheet so that it looks nice. Now I want to use the goal seek function. And remember, goal seek is a way to back into a number. So you know what you want your number to be, you're just not sure how to get there, to get to your number. And goal seek will do that for you. So I want to, in this worksheet, I have operating income of about 2.5 million. And I'd really like my operating income to be closer to 3 million in this example. When you're using goal seek, the cell that is your set cell, or the cell that you want to back into, must contain a formula. It can't contain a number because then there's no way to back into that. So it has to actually contain a formula. So goal seek is found on the data ribbon in the what if analysis group. So I'm going to click what if analysis and go into goal seek. So here again, my set cell is H25. I want set cell H25 to be set to 3 million. And I'm going to have to change something in order to achieve that. So I think I'm going to change my support, general, and administrative. So when I click on B8, which contains my percentage for support, general, and administrative, it automatically formats that so that it is an absolute reference. So now I have set cell H25 to a value of $3 million by changing cell B8. Once everything's in place, I'll go ahead and click OK. So when I do that, I can scroll back up. It's telling me that it did it. And I'll go ahead and click OK. And you can see it changed it from 18.75 to 17.32. And actually, if you look up here in the formula bar, it goes out quite a bit further than 2 decimal places. I just have this one set to format to 2 decimal places. Now I decided, you know, that's really not realistic. I can't really get my support, general, and administrative down that low. So I'm going to change it back to 18.75. Let me zoom this down so we can see both of those cells at once. And I'm going to try it again, but this time I'm going to change a different cell. So again, I'm going to go into data. You don't have to have cell H25 selected. If you don't, you'll just have to type it into the dialog box. Goal seek, and I want to do 3 million again. Make sure I have 3 million there. One more zero. And this time I'm going to change my marketing. Maybe marketing is something that I can play with a little bit. Maybe I don't have to have such a big marketing budget. So this time I choose by changing cell B5. And go ahead and click OK. And you can see it had to drop it down to 13.57 in order to do that. So now, if I were to change my marketing and reduce it to 13.57, I could have my total operating income of $3 million. If I decide this is what I want to do, I can click OK. If I don't and I want to revert back to my prior worksheet, I click Cancel and I'm back. You don't have to change the total number. You could also change an individual number in the worksheet. So I could change just July, for example, or pick a month that I have really high income like August and just change August and see how that affects it. But again, the one caveat is you must use a cell that has a formula in it. So now I want to move over here and look at another worksheet that I have set up. This one is going to use GoalSeek to determine a car payment. So you can use GoalSeek to determine an individual payment like this. In our prior example, we had all the months that were adding up and we were determining using GoalSeek to determine the total net income. In this case, we're looking at just one area. So first I want to enter my payment function, and I'm going to do this using the formula again. So equals, I always include a negative sign in front of my payment. We haven't covered the payment function yet in class, but you'll be looking at it next week. So I think it's good to give you a little bit of heads up on it. If you don't include a negative sign in front of the payment function, then your payment will show as a negative number, which is correct because it's a payment. It's something that's being deducted. But to make it look nice, I always include the negative sign. And then I'm going to put the payment function, and it tells you it calculates a payment for a loan based on constant payments and a constant interest rate. Open my parenthesis, and now I need my rate. So my rate is here, so I'm just going to click it for the cell reference. This is an annual interest rate, so I need to divide this by 12 because I am making monthly payments, not annual payments. So once I have my rate, I hit a comma to go to the next part of my formula, which is my number of periods. This case I have it written as 60. We're making monthly payments and I have 60 months, so that's fine. If I had the number of years in this worksheet as 5, I would have to multiply the cell B5 times 12 to get my true number of payments. My present value is $15,000. I don't have a future value. Type, again, can either be a 1 or a 0. I'm not going to enter a type because it doesn't really make a difference in a car payment like this. So I'll close my parenthesis and hit enter. So my payment is $286.52. That's a little much for my car. I don't think I can afford $286. I had really budgeted only $250. So again, I can use GoalSeek to determine what I can change in order to make that payment $250. GoalSeek, you are limited to just one changing cell. Excel has another function called Solver that you can have multiple constraints, not just one cell that can be changed. And we will look at Solver in the second Excel course if you end up taking that class. So in this case, though, I want to look at the 3 variables I have. I have a loan amount, a term, and an interest rate. What can I change in order to achieve a payment of $250 that's realistic? So I'm going to go to my what if analysis. My set cell is going to be B7. I want it to be $250, and I'm going to change first my loan amount. Maybe if I get a little bit of a down payment or if I find a little less expensive car, this might work for me. So I have set cell B7, which includes my payment formula, to a value of $250 by changing B4 my loan amount. So I'll go ahead and click OK. So now it's telling me $13,000 basically. So if I could come up with $2,000 for my down payment, that would work. Or if I can find a car that's a little less expensive, that would work as well. I don't want to do that, so I'm going to click Cancel to go back to my original outcome. And let's see if I can change my term. So I'll go back to What If, GoalSeek. And again, I want my payment to be my set cell. I want it to be $250. This time I'm going to change my term, or B5, and click OK. So if I could spread this out one more year and do a 6-year loan, that would work because I could still do my $15,000 car. I could still make my interest rate at 5.5%, but this time I would be paying for 70 months instead of for 60. So again, I'm going to hit cancel, and now I'm going to try the third option, which is my interest rate. Okay, so the third one here, I'm going to look at my interest rate. What kind of interest rate do I need in order to achieve a payment of $250? So I'm going to go back into my goal seek. My set cell and my to value are the same in all these scenarios. The only thing that changes is my changing cell. So this is telling me I have to have an interest-free loan for 5 years in order to maintain everything else and have a $250 car payment. And that's probably unlikely, but you never know. A lot of car dealerships are offering 0 interest loans. Usually they're not for 5 years, but it's something that you could try. So by looking at this, you know that's probably not too realistic. Or perhaps that is your goal. Now you know you need to find an interest-free loan in order to make this scenario work. I'll go ahead and click cancel to get back out of this. So those are our 3 different options, and that is how we've used GoalSeek in this situation. Again, GoalSeek can be used for just about anything. You can figure out your net income, a house payment, a car payment, monthly credit card payment. Anything that uses a formula can use GoalSeek. You can figure out how much production you need in order to reach a certain profit. You can figure out your margins that you would need. So a lot of different options with GoalSeek, but it's basically a way to back into a number. So I hope you found this helpful, and if you have any questions, please let me know. Remember that once you've watched all of the PowerPoint demonstrations and the recorded lectures, you should attempt to take the post test. Have a great week.